Kia ora and hello, friends. Welcome back to the Restoring Connections podcast. If you're dialing in, you know what we're going to want to talk about. We're talking about relationship. We're talking about building resilience into our most important relationships. We love to talk about personal responsibility, proactive care, powerful communication, healthy boundaries, all of the things, our favorite things when it comes to building strength and resilience into our most important relationships, which coincidentally, as you've probably discovered, sometimes are the relationships that cause the most heartache and pain. And you know, obviously there's a reason for that. If somebody who doesn't mean a whole lot to you treats you in a particular way, you know, well, that's, you can kind of deal with that. But the pain that we experience in relationships where there is a deep sense of hope, where we are really hoping to feel very, very loved. Those relationships where we've invested ourselves deeply, and we can't help but hope and expect for that to be back. And when we experience pain in those relationships, that's hard. So that's what we're wrestling with. What are the tools? What are the points of character? What does it take to build a bond of connection between me and the people I love most that can get through the really difficult times that happen on planet Earth? Because they happen. And when they do, there needs to be a strength in the relationship between us. So today we are diving into how do you not give up? You know, on like right down to the micro of, you know, with your child, with your spouse, with your close friend, with your business partner who's currently driving you completely crazy. Or how do you not give up on the world when you turn on the news and it's flooded with disaster, basically, and brokenness? And so I am super, super happy to be sitting across from a very dear friend of mine who I told when I reached out to him about having this podcast. He represents to me, he's probably maybe the best representation I have in my life of not giving upness. And so I thought it was a really cool topic. At Alistair Reese, you are a friend, more than a friend. You've been a mentor to us. I think you and Jeannie together, that's Ali's wife, have been a safe place for us. You guys have helped us navigate some pretty tricky waters, really, over the last, what has it been, 17 years? We've been through probably the most painful, I think of probably like 2 or 3 seasons that we went through that were the most painful that Cora and I have gone through. You guys were, you know, totally with us in the midst of that, and just being a safe place and gently provoking us and challenging us and guiding at times, while also, you know, more than anything, creating a safe place for us. So I'm really grateful and just stoked to have you with us. As I mentioned, Alistair's wife, Jeannie, amazing, Canadian, Lebanese, right? And their beautiful daughter, Naomi, who's also a good friend of ours, and Koro, her husband, and beautiful, the new addition, beautiful Akare Pashon. What a blessing. So with that said, I'm hoping that, you know, I don't share too much. I'm hoping mostly we hear from you. I'll get all my stuff out of the way in the beginning. But with that said, tēnā koutou, e te whānau, kua karapina mai nei, nā kai whakarongo. I think that's how we'd say that. Everybody out there listening, we just want to mihi to you. And I want to say tēnā koe. We don't really see you, but in our hearts, we imagine that you, like us, are navigating challenges in the relational space and navigating what should I do? What should I do next, given what you're, you know, working through. So we mihi to you. But most of all, ka nui te mihi ki a koe matua, Alistair. Kei te kai kōrero, o mo tēnei rā, kei te manu kōrero, te whitiki o te ki, Mō koe te whakatīnanatanga o te mātauranga o te atua, me te atawhai o te atua, me te aroha o te atua mō ngā tangata katoa. So we just see your heart, and we acknowledge, I want to acknowledge how you have been. You probably don't feel like this. You probably don't feel like this all the time. But to so many of us, you have been the embodiment of the wisdom of God and the kindness of God, and most importantly, by far, the love of God for people. That's definitely my favorite thing about you, is the way you love people and want to see people thrive. So, yeah, tēnā koe, mātou Alistair. I've got a question, but I'll leave it there in case you want to say anything. Any greetings?
Kia ora, Matt. Kia koutou katoa to all who are participating in this afternoon. Greetings to everybody, and kia koe, Matt. Thank you for your invite and your extraordinarily kind and, dare I say, exaggerated
respectfully
accolades. So thanks for inviting me into this conversation around a topic which is, as you say, deeply challenging. If we're going to center the talk around the issue of relationships,
impossible, basically.
As I always say, relationships are the most challenging thing that we've face, I think, in this life. Nothing more complicated, nothing more challenging, and yet at the same time nothing more rewarding as well. So mihi atu.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, that's for sure. I did want to say too, just as we get started, I'm aware that not everybody out there listening would identify as a follower of Jesus, or there's lots of different all kinds of different people who jump into this kaupapa, and we just mihi to you as well. And so, Alistair and I are both definitely followers of Jesus. But yeah, we just want to acknowledge that, and our endeavor is to just talk about what we all have in common, which is the wrestle for love. What does it mean to love? So Ali, I've got some deep questions to dive into that I'm excited to ask you. But as a starting point, can you tell us a little bit about your day-to-day mahi, the spaces that you find yourself in, and a little bit of the whakapapa, or the story behind, what where you are today, and the kind of stuff that you get involved in today?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. You mentioned earlier on in your intro about something about stickability. I forget the exact.
Not giving up.
Not giving up. And it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it before, but as soon as you said that, I thought back to my mother and father.
Wow.
And there's a lot of dimensions, obviously, to the discipline of sticking with something. But because it came to mind, I want to mention them. You're asking me, in a sense, who am I, where do I come from, and what do I do? And my mother and father were a couple who lived in Hamilton, New Zealand. They call it the Tron. And so that's where I was raised. And they were people who, well, you've mentioned already that you and I are followers of Jesus. Well, at least I try to. I'm
on a good day.
I'm a try-hard. On a good day. And they were not. So I'm talking about some characteristics which are deeply human. They're not necessarily faith characteristics, although we'd like them to be faith characteristics. But so my father was Colin, and he was raised on a farm in Opotiki. His father, Heck, was a sheep farmer, but he lost the farm in the Depression in 1928. We had a deep depression in New Zealand, so they were all forced off the farm. And my dad had to leave school when he was 13 years old, and he started an apprenticeship in Hamilton, became a plumber.
Man, off to work. My boy is almost 13, so that really hits home.
So he ended up building a business, and he was also a good sports player. Loved a sport, so raised us with that love. My mum was a nurse. She developed tuberculosis as a young married person, and then had some other sicknesses in their life. The reason I guess I'm mentioning that is I'm sort of exploring my own thinking around this aspect of sticking with something. They were a little bit of that old school was kind of just harden up.
Yeah.
Harden
There's a
up.
beauty in that, eh?
You know, so you walk off the farm, you have nothing, you know, suffering deep sicknesses and dependent on others to help you. And so I think they imbued in me some characteristics that they felt and they offered them to us as something to aspire to. So those were, in a sense, character goals, character traits that I was raised in, and I fell short of those many times, particularly as a teenager and as a young 20-year-old when I turned on and tuned out.
Drop out.
All of that, something like that, and in many ways chose a completely different path, but ultimately returned to a path of where those characteristics of, we would call them the fruit of the Spirit, where the fruit and the character of someone is highly esteemed. And so just returning back to my mother and father, they often failed, obviously, as we all do as human beings. They failed a lot in themselves, but it was that in terms of the characteristics or the character of a human that was most important to them, as opposed to, for example, even though my father was very successful as a businessman, ultimately it was never that which he actually paraded. It was actually the character and those that he esteemed around him, and those whom he recommended to me were people whom he esteemed of a high character. So interesting, just reflecting on that perhaps some residual seeds were planted, that character is something that is really important. And I just want to say again, and if you just ask my wife, Matt, I fail miserably so much in that. But I can say it's an aspiration to be someone who has character, and of course that stickability or not giving up is a part of that. Now, going on from that, there are some other aspects to it. That's your baseline. But going back also to the question that you asked, what's my day look like? And when people ask me sometimes, because this is the question that often gets asked of a person, what do you do for a living? And I often think, they think I'm going to be smart ass or something when I say this. I sort of say, well, it depends what day of the week it is. Because that's...
I think of it as basically, it'd be like asking Gandalf what he does day to day.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like, and I realize, and when I'm asking you that question, I'm basically asking that, and it's an impossible thing to answer. So, but that, I like the picture of Gandalf. That's how I see. You're basically zooming in to where you are needed, and where you can be most helpful, in all these different ways. But then you also probably love just actually having afternoons up at the place, out in the, mucking out, out with the animals and stuff as well. And that's in you too.
Yeah, so we live, Jeannie and I, and we raised our two children beside the Kaituna River. In the takiwā on the rohe of Tapuika, no reira, ko Rangiuri te Maunga, ko Kaituna te Awa, ko Himalaya te Waka, ko Waitangi te Kawanata, ko Ihukarai te tangata me te Atua, te hei Mauri ora. So we live on a farm which is beside the Kaituna River in the beautiful Bay of Plenty. And I stumbled onto that farm. Jeannie and I stumbled into that farm, and that's probably a whole podcast in itself in terms of how that happened. But one of the things was I was I'm going to use I love this word, peripatetic traveller. It means a wanderer for around 10 years around the globe, and then came back to New Zealand. And to cut the story short, I really just was apprehended by the Holy Spirit, by the Spirit, and kind of reluctantly in many ways came kicking and screaming it to become, as you say, a follower of Christ. And that's what I've been attempting to do for the last 40 odd years. But getting to the point of the story is that providentially we got led to this piece of land, and a few of us purchased this piece of land. And I'd been, well, some people would call us a hippie, I guess, in that I hadn't had a day's work in my life hardly, and fell into becoming a dairy farmer. And a local old man down the road taught me how to milk cows.
Wow.
So for 16 years we milked cows and learned to get up early in the morning.
After 10 years of roaming the world.
Exactly. So that was a baptism of fire, but it taught me a lot.
You had to lean back into your roots.
Lean back into the roots. Exactly. That actually hard work is a good thing, and to work faithfully. So, but we live there, and that farm is now a kiwi fruit orchard. So, but with that change of the land use, I exchanged my occupation from being a dairy farmer to going back to university. And so for the last 25 years or so have been immersed in learning history and theology in academic environments, and what that means for living in this land. And that actually was the whole reason, in the sense, to go back to academia, was to learn history of this land, of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and to understand some things that I was slow to learn about. So my daily life exists of getting up early, maybe going to feed the chooks, having a bit of prayer, and then being faced with what the day holds. And sometimes it can be, as we did on Saturday, sharing the sheep, or as the day before, a couple of days before that, we're in Wellington, standing before Parliament and expressing some ideas around Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And so it's just a beautiful life in some ways of variety, deep colour, deep challenges, but not knowing always from one day to the next what the mahi will be. Yeah, that's so cool, Alistair. And that beautifully brings us into the next, where I want to head to next, is so that you paint this really quite a beautiful picture there. But anybody who's lived as a human being for more than 10 minutes knows that the human journey is fraught with challenges and difficulties, and through that, I'm 41, and when I am with someone like you, you're a bit out in front of me, in terms of years, and the softness of your heart. At least that's how I experience you, and others, not all, of course, but that just impacts me so deeply, because I, even at 41, I already feel like there have been enough situations that I've gone through to just basically want to just completely throw in the towel on planet Earth. This whole place is just completely, there's no evidence for hope. There's too many setbacks, too much. It feels, especially in times where you feel like we'll go through the same patterns, whether it's with close relationships or, again, like I said, what's on the news. And I'd love to hear, it's a marvel, to me, to see someone, to be with you and to see the journey you've walked through. And I know I'm sure you would acknowledge that you've been through a lot of hardship. You would probably also say that you've been incredibly blessed and really lucky in a lot of ways too. But I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about, you don't have to name specifics, because, hardships will almost always include some person who you care about that you don't necessarily want to throw under the bus. But, some of the things that you've been through, and I guess, you've already touched on it, but can you go deeper into where do you think that
that resilience, because here you are, here's your book, that I've just read and absolutely love, and you're down at Parliament. I mean, you are contending. You are in the ring with friends, not by yourself. You're in the ring doing your bit. You can't do that without, there's got to be some fire of hope in you for what could be, and I wonder if you could talk to us about what you think has kept that alive in you through the various twists and turns and myriad opportunities for discouragement that you've no doubt walked through.
Yeah, those are deep questions. Like all your questions are deep questions. I'm hesitant in some ways to be completely honest because I'm going to have to talk about my faith.
Yeah, bring it on. That's why I said that at the beginning, because it's almost like trigger warning for people who might be and I want people to know that's where we're heading with this episode. So please, share anything you feel comfortable sharing.
When I was a young man and I was in a rock and roll band in my
that is a great start.
Early 20s, I'd already been overseas for a while, but I came back to New Zealand and I was playing in this band in Hamilton and we got a gig. This is going to be a bit of a long story. Okay.
Oh, yeah. All right. Awesome.
We got a gig over the Christmas period here in Tauranga. So I was living in Hamilton. We were this band. We came over here and did this gig.
Whereabouts? At a venue that still exists today?
No, the venue's closed up.
Okay.
Yeah, it was sort of a nightclub sort of place out of Greaton, actually.
Nice.
And the name of the band was Climax. Yeah, our rock and roll band, real hardcore rock. It was anyway.
What were you? You're on guitar?
I was on drums and vocal. Yeah.
You were on drums?
Yeah, percussion, hand drums and percussion. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I was a wannabe really musician. I was never really good, but I was played with some really good people. We came here and there was a boat that had arrived back from the French nuclear zone.
Oh, yeah.
It was called the Free. Okay. And the Free had gone up to Mururoa and was actively protesting against the French nuclear tests. Mm-hmm. And they had been captured by the French, and it was worldwide news, etc.
This is not Rainbow Warrior.
This was pre-Rainbow Warrior, but some of my friends who were on that boat actually ended up on the Rainbow Warrior. So this would have been 10 years before the Rainbow Warrior.
Okay,
so this was, the Free was an old Danish sailing ship built in 1912. Came into the port here and it was at Sulphur Point and was being repaired. And so the band, we learnt about the ship, so we went down and met the guys, and I just fell in love with the idea of what that. And so left the band, left my university studies, and joined this group of idealists who were wanting to save the world from nuclear destruction. Yeah. The boat was in Tauranga for quite a few months, and during that time, we, in Māori would say, we wānanga together. We talked together over weeks and weeks as to what was the next response to this nuclear crisis that was facing the world at the time. And so people dropped in from all over the country, leading intellectual lights, pacifists, peaceniks, and everything. And and this is in simple terms what we came up with. We came up with the idea that nuclear weapons were formed by fear. People relied on on that as a deterrent because they were afraid. Yeah. And in our naivety, we thought, well, okay, let's adopt the opposite spirit. Yeah. And we thought we'd go to all the nuclear powers, right? And we would deliver messages of hope. So we designed, one of the key things we did was we designed a postcard, and on one side of it had a picture of a nuclear bomb going off, and on the other side of it we had a literal postcard, and in the corner it said, we sow the seeds of peace, accept our love, and let it grow. And then we had a place where people could write their message. And what we did was we said to the people, we're going to take your message and we're going to deliver it to the United States, to Great Britain, to China, and to Russia, etc., etc. The reason I'm telling this long story is that in sitting around for those months and really grappling with the core issues of what the world was in need of, in our childlike kind of naive faith, we understood that actually love was the thing that was needed, and that this was a core need of the human soul. So concurrently, I went on that boat, and I sailed on that boat for 2.5 years, and we sailed all the way through the Pacific.
That is awesome.
Yeah. And it was a journey of faith, literally. But it set me off also on a spiritual journey, and I was deeply impacted in the midst of that kind of philosophical meanderings around the condition of the world. I was confronted by the human condition and our brokenness. And I saw even in the midst of us, those of us that were wanting to express to the world, there's a better way. In the midst of that, I could see the brokenness within us as a crew, and we were multinational group of people, multi-age, etc., etc.
And there's the crossroads when you where you just go, oh, forget it, we're all disqualified, or something happens,
And I can't explain, why some people would just choose to turn on and drop out, whereas others would respond and say, okay, let's contribute positively into this space and further explore. So I went into that with that kind of kernel of hope there, and I guess also just encouraged by those others that were around me, that they shared this idealism, and somewhere that idealism ultimately led me to that actually there's only one perfect lover in the world, and his name is Jesus, right? And as complex as that is, it starts off pretty simple, but as you know, it becomes very complicated, that equation of, who God is and all of that. But I even forget what the question was now, Matt, but
doesn't matter.
Yeah. So
it was around the retention of that hope.
The retention of that hope. That's right. So I wanted to tell you that story for a couple of reasons. One, because that was my immersion for the first time into the aspiration of love, or the concept of love as being that which the world needed. Right. But it also started the spiritual journey in my own soul when I was actually looking at us as in our humanity and saying, actually, we don't have it within ourselves. We're broken. We're truly broken. And even as we try hard, the hardest that we try, we can't do it. And so at least my version at the end of that was to conclude that actually there is a God, and that's where my hope ultimately lays. So this is the answer to your question, where does my hope come from? My hope actually comes from, and I think this is where the longevity comes from in some sense, is an acknowledgement of my own brokenness, and an acknowledgement of my own need, and an acknowledgement that actually I don't have that which the world needs ultimately. I can be a conveyor of some things, but don't rely on me, because, I'm going to let you down. But in my understanding of the revelation, or the understanding of the revealed one in Jesus or in God, that there is a hope. But what that hope requires is actually, I think, in the first instance, an understanding of our human need. And that's where, for me, and I'll just finish on this point to go back to your question, is where does my hope comes, or my energy, I believe, comes from the point when I actually can acknowledge that need, acknowledge the brokenness, and just in a sense give up and say, I can't do it. You know, and Matt, there's a sense where that activity takes place daily.
Yeah.
There's a daily coming to the place and a point and saying, you know, I'm under no illusions about the condition of my own heart and my inability to even fulfill some of the most basic requirements of this good character that I talked about. And so, God help me. God help me. And in a way that it's like in there, because the scriptures talk about, you know, that hope is the foundation of the soul. And it's as though in that moment of and I say daily, and sometimes it can be hourly, of actually expressing that actual fact that I can't even fix the thing with my wife on my own. I can't even fix the brokenness in my own family, let alone the brokenness in the whole world. You know, and ultimately, I'm a person who is in need, and so there's this thing called grace, and grace literally means a gift. And you cannot, I mean, theologians write screeds and books and everything, and I don't know the right definitions of it, but somehow an energy comes, right? And an energy comes which gives an ability to keep going. It's like, I guess, a marathon runner, you know, and someone comes up to them with a bottle of water or some sugar water or something, they get a hit and they can carry on. And so that's what I would see grace as. And sometimes in terms of my vision of the world, because I'm still concerned on that kind of global scale, I mean, those as much as that's what I call the meta narrative, I'm really exercised by that, as much as I'm daily exercised and probably trained for that around the table of my own household. And that's, you know, where the rubber really meets the road, and where I can actually be trained in the deep things of this character formation, which ultimately might have some possibilities of giving something to the wider world, things that are wrought in that anvil of challenge and difficulty of the human relationship and my own family.
Isn't that wonderful? Thank you, Alistair. That was super awesome. In the last episode that we did, where I was sitting with Dallas, we were talking about how even, you know, Cora and I have just been walking through something just in the last few weeks, and we just it's like we just haven't got it within ourselves to try to come to a place of really being able to meet each other's emotional needs. You know, and it's funny, you know, like in our Restoring Connections curriculum, there's 16 points, and they're basic. They're not ideas. They're basically things to do. They're really, really practical. And the last one is, I've got a plan for unmet needs. You know, is basically, what do I do when the needs just aren't met in my human relationships? Because you have moments like right now is a good example of, I mean, I'm like absolutely buzzing right now. You know, this is a good example. I'm hanging out with you, you know, but, you know, the vast majority of my life doesn't feel like that. And there, you know, Cora and I have been walking through some things lately where we just need a miracle. We need help. That's probably the best way to put it. We just need help. And that's become our real important, you know, catch cry for us is relationships are hard, get help. And so I'm with you, you know, for, you know, anybody listening, I'm like, wherever your help comes from, get help. Like, I'm with you. For me, there's most of the time, it's like, I just need something from eternity, something from God, you know, something from the Spirit of God to stir hope in my heart. Because there are times that we just haven't got it within ourselves. And we can see with so many people, we veer towards one of two extremes. We either in hubris and arrogance, we pretend that we do have it all, and we sort of present ourselves in some way, and we watch this happen all the time with leaders. Basically, sort of, we find out they're living two lives, and the whole thing completely melts down at some point. It kind of, and then the other extreme, of course, is just the callus of cynicism that forms over your heart, and then it's very difficult to stay in the. I really like that you use the word contribute. That was you talked about that. It's sort of a fork in the road for you. Was okay. I'm realizing, even within this beautiful group of people doing our absolute best, there isn't a perfection here. We are not bringing heaven to earth, not on our own anyway. But there was a moment there where it became about how can I contribute, and it's a mystery, isn't it? There's a letting go. There's a grabbing hold of something else, but it requires a letting go of being a particular thing in yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's always a balance in these things, and there's a tension, and I can see that what I'm talking about could be misconstrued to a form of fatalism, which would say, well, I haven't, I can't do it, so I kind of give up, and if God doesn't do it, then
it's not letting go of caring.
No.
Hey.
And I think there's an active letting go. So let me just I use an example in a sense that if, like, the help doesn't come in a vacuum, because you're talking about getting help, right?
Yeah.
I think that the act of faith in one level of acknowledging weakness, of letting go that human strength, there is also incumbent within that a responsibility to be on the lookout for where does my help come from, right? And therefore not being either closed off to the fact that help comes in many various different forms, and it could come, for example, in just a beautiful sunrise, and hope comes with a sunrise. It could come from a friend dropping around for a coffee. It could come
flawed, imperfect human being.
Totally. It could come from listening to a song. So what I'm wanting to, I guess, is to, in a sense, to balance what I'm saying is that this is not, we're living in a real world, and help can be tangible, but there is a certain position that I think we need to have in order to recognize, that's a help, and I need actually to reach out and take hold of that. And so I think that because I could be very sorry for myself in a lot of situations, and I could live in that, and I could just trip over my bottom lip a lot, know. So I think that's another side.
That's good.
That's
really good.
That's maybe drawing on the strength of my mother and father and say, "Come on, harden up."
Totally.
But look, life is full of so many contradictions in this. Thing, and we do need we need wisdom. I'll give you another example of this, and I think what we can do, we can just talk about these things, and people, there's an honesty of your own heart that's required.
So
okay,
so
the honesty of the heart needs to have a clarity about it, and because at the end of the day, there's no point in fooling yourself, right? So there's lots of ways that one can respond to crises. I'll give you an example of this. We lost our son. We lost our son Sean in an avalanche. It was a big crisis, probably it's the biggest crisis that we've ever had. And how do I respond to that? My cousin comes to me who had also lost her son. She comes to me at the funeral, and I love her dearly, and I hope I'm not betraying confidence in this, but I think it's important to be said. And she said, "Ellie, we just have to be tough. We just got to be tough, and we'll get through it." In the midst of this, I'm listening to a lot of voices. I mean, a lot of voices are coming. Oh, he's in a better place, or all these sort of voices. People aren't. I'm listening for the voice that actually is going to be offering me wise life. And I knew that my dear cousin, that was her experience. That's what she had done. But I knew that wasn't what my wisdom was. And in fact, my wisdom was completely the opposite. My perceived wisdom was actually going with the flow of tears and just allowing the tears to roll, and being in that place when the feeling of pain, that would come in the midst of the memory, either in a short time after, or even as I'm experiencing it now, that I can give in to that pain, and that there's a God-given gift of the washing of the tears. There's actually a Māori whakatauki that goes something like this. It goes, "Mata rere o ta roimata me ta hupe, ka ia te mate." Yes, so by the flowing of the snot and of the tears, the pain is eased, the pain of the death is eased. And so that was my experience, Matters. That's, there's...
You're connecting the importance of grief to hope, and
and I know that it comes to an end, and at the time that washing and being able to fall into what I would call the loving arms, in that place. So, but I know that there are other times when it's maybe not appropriate to do that as well. So, I guess in conclusion, I'd say there's no formulaic response to these things, and each to their own. But what's life to you? And that's with the honesty of heart that I'm talking about. Is we need to be really honest to say, okay, what's really bringing life to me, in terms of how I'm responding to this challenge. Say it could be this relational challenge. Am I exacerbating the pain by my response? Or one other thing that's been very helpful for me, there's certain aspects of the biblical narrative that have been very helpful to me over the years, and one of the stories of Jesus, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's before his journey up to the cross, and you'll be familiar with the cry. He goes into the garden, and he understands something of where things are leading him to at this point in time, and he cries out to his Father. He said, "If it were possible, take this cup from me, but not my will, but thy will be done." And that's my prayer. It's like, I don't know, we were talking either off camera or on camera, I can't remember what it was. Some of our choices, we're free to do those choices. We're free to choose, for example, can we walk away from the pain, or do we actually stick within the pain with that flicker of hope that ultimately something, can be birthed in the midst of that. And that prayer which says, "Yet not my will, but thy will be done," has to do with this aspect of covenant. And one of the things to me has been a real gift. It's the gift that I didn't have when I was exploring the world. That was in the search for what we would call freedom. I remember the Woodstock
Sure.
song,
Yeah.
Richie Havens, I love that song, freedom, freedom, But we thought freedom was actually through expressing yourselves just how you wanted to, when you felt, and, whatever was going to satisfy the flesh or the soul at that point in time. But one of the introductions of the biblical narrative that has really helped me is the understanding of this covenant, the idea of the ring fence of a covenant. And actually the ring fence of the covenant is the commitment into that relational agreement that, for better or for worse, we're committed to each other. But ultimately, I think that in that there is underscoring that, or underpinning that, there is the understanding that ultimately it's not down to you two, or you, however many people are in, that there is a community around you.
Oh, man.
There is
So
creation
good.
around you. There's all of these things around you that if you can stick within that agreement, that sacred commitment to each other, that help will come. And we live in a fallen world. We live in a broken world. So it will never be perfection in that way. It's never going to be Hollywood. But it actually will still be something that will bring to the soul such a deep satisfaction, having come through the trials, the fiery trials, and you see the fruits that come out of that through both the patience of your partner or the patience of the other one who you're negotiating the relationship with. That interaction brings forth some kind of fruit that the other way of well, if it was my will, I'd just walk away, actually. It just seems that, there can be obviously some satisfactions out of that, but I think that the deepest satisfaction is gained in some of that hard yard stuff.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing so openly, Alistair. I'm so glad. I hadn't even really thought to draw that out of you, the connection with grief, but it is, it's in my journey, absolutely essential. We may have this in common, that, for me, it's really been, I was at a real crossroads where things within a sort of a typical, Christian cultural context just weren't giving me life like they had in a previous season. The context hadn't changed, but I had changed, and I just was sitting in the same kind of meetings and services that I had 10 years ago, and for some reason what was bringing so much life to me then just had shifted, and it was just such a desperate moment, and I'm a glass half full kind of person, but it was really helpful for me to go through a season of life where, like, me being glass half full in my personality was not gonna, life was just absolutely battering just battering it out of me, and I wasn't gonna be able to just, out of the force of my personality, manifest joy. It just wasn't working anymore, and I found myself being invited to a Maori prayer meeting down at Waimapu Marae, and I, actually, and then they invited me, a couple of weeks later to a tangi. I love that the te reo Maori word for what we would think of as a funeral. It's not really a like for like, translation, but the word tangi is just the verb to cry. And it's funny, in contrast, I've got a similar story, that you share, obviously, completely different in scope and scale in terms of how I was impacted personally. But my young cousin passed away earlier this year, 24 years old, and one of the first things that we were sort of exhorted to do, from the person leading the service, well-meaning for sure, but offered up a prayer on our behalf of an apology to God for our emotions, and it was, I guess I've just been so grateful for being with my Maori friends who have taught me to grieve and to, actually, in some ways when we gather together now and tangi together over a precious person in the community who's passed away, we are grieving all that's happened. Like we're grieving all the distance between earth and heaven that we've all experienced, because we're not meant for that. We know it on the inside. We're meant for something perfect, but we're not experiencing that, And Cora and I, people laugh sometimes when Cora and I tell, one of our keys for our relationship, about once a year, usually around New Year's, we will both individually very proactively grieve what it has cost us individually to be married to each other. And we don't, and it's like, what kind of jacked up, and it's like, no, that is totally necessary for us. Because do we love being married to each other? Absolutely. Has it cost us profoundly? Has it been incredibly painful at times? Yes, absolutely. And we just own it, and I'll write out, these are this is the damage to me that this covenant has cost me. And I just let myself grieve it. And it's funny, as that happens, it works through something, and then hope.
Do you share it with each other, Matt, or not?
Do we? I think we might have, like the first one time, once or twice.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have a problem with it.
Okay.
It's certainly not something we would hide from each other, but we're not, I don't think we feel compelled to. That's not the purpose.
Yeah.
That's not the purpose. Because we try to have a discipline of asking each other every once in a while, hypothetically, if a guy like me wanted to make you feel a bit more loved, if you got some tips for me, what might you how might you guide somebody like me who wanted to make you more loved? So that's there, and so we're grieving the gap, we're grieving the ways in which we didn't meet each other's needs. And I'm a real practical person. It's somebody far smarter than me, who's done a lot more theological study could tell you, like, how this works. I just know that it does. There's something about when I fully tune in, exactly as you're saying, and it's not a wallowing, but it's an honesty, and embrace that. Somehow, hope springs up, like a well, in that, and I just think that's incredibly important. And on that note, as we sort of bring this Wakarere to a landing. So what would you say? So I've got an 18-year-old daughter, Kiana, who of course, and my 16-year-old just about to turn 17. I can see in my kids, there's this, probably because they've got social media like we didn't have. I didn't, have access to. When I was a kid, I wouldn't have known what in the world is happening with Israel and Gaza, for example, but our kids, they know. They know climate change and, the stuff going on. And there's a weight that I can see. It impacts me as a dad. I can see there's a weight on them to feel the need to contribute in some way to the restoration of the world. And I'm wondering, what would be your corridor? What are some thoughts that you'd have to young people, at the beginning of their journey? As if the first two questions weren't hard enough.
My daughter Naomi sometimes says to me, she says it to her mother too, to Jeannie. She'll say, "Dad, stick to your lane."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or stick to your knitting. That's the one I've heard recently. Okay. People say that to me all the time because I want to go all over the place. And Matt, stick to your knitting. So you get that from your daughter? Oh,
yeah, I get it from my daughter. So I'm going to try and answer your question this in kind of a multi-dimensional way.
I think I know where you're going.
Okay, so one of the disciplines that I'm trying to apply myself is what's my lane.
Yeah.
Okay, let me step back a bit further even. Again, I can't answer this completely without drawing on my own worldview.
Yeah, bring it
on. And actually that's really, I've got that confidence now more from Te Ao Māori, because I know that when I stand in a Te Ao Māori space, everything is done from a tikanga perspective, and it's just put out there, and that's just the assumption I'm operating out of how I see the world, or how the world
no
has
disclaimer needed.
Yeah. So when I did my PhD on reconciliation, which has been the reconciliation between Māori and the colonizers, I got this picture of reconciliation being like on a big scale, if you look at the cosmological globe, if you're looking at it as a picture of a giant jigsaw puzzle. And so every part of that globe, if you look at it as a jigsaw, and you're asking the question, what needs to be done for reconciliation to take place? And so some of the pieces of that reconciliation might have forgiveness on it, might have justice, might have truth-telling, different things like that on. So the quest for reconciliation is actually knowing what part of that puzzle is required in a particular point in time.
Yeah.
So, but ultimately, the whole reconciliation responsibility lies with God.
Yeah.
All right, and God is the one who ultimately has a plan for reconciliation. He actually has a plan for reconciling the cosmos, actually, right? The whole cosmos.
And fair enough, he got the whole thing going.
That's exactly right. So I can say to him, okay, ultimately it's yours. Yours is, your responsibility. But knowing that within that there is also a gift of belonging for me. That I actually have a place of restoring, of restoration, and that's actually a privilege. But that privilege actually takes time to understand.
It does,
and it actually takes time to have some of the experiences of life in order to be able to be in a place where you can actually contribute meaningfully.
Yeah.
So
you touch the electric fences on the other side of your lane a few times.
Totally. Yeah. So you have to pay your dues a little bit. But so the essence of the question is, where does the hope come from for that? And I think the hope ultimately is a two-pronged thing. Firstly, understanding that the ultimate burden is not mine, right? But that is not a fatalistic escape clause where you can just say, oh, well, it's God's, therefore I can just hive off. No, as I said, I think everybody has the privilege of actually being part of the restorative process. Right. Yeah. And so figuring out what that is, and also figuring the limits of that, that's part of the work, right? So
figuring out what it isn't.
Knowing what it isn't. It's like work. For example, sometimes you got to do a whole lot of things to find out, oh, that's not what we're going to do.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think that everybody has that responsibility. The other thing, Matt, I think is important to understand too is what I call seasons, and I'm a big believer in the seasons of life, so that just as there are natural seasons, so there are ebbs and flows within our own life. There are seasons when we probably have the capacity for high output in a particular places, or actually it might be a season of just receiving. It might be a season of receiving the infilling, receiving the educations, receiving the knowledge for skill sets, etc. So these are discernments,
or surviving when you've got toddlers running around and you're just hanging in there for dear life, and hoping that by the time, hoping that you're still married and you haven't, seriously abused any of your children. You're basically just hanging in there through that season,
So I liken that to when we were sailing, for example. You're going through a storm. There's no point in putting all the sails full up. You just want to, you tie the rig down. You just, you just batten down the hatches, and get through the storm. So these are discernments and recognitions of don't kick against the goads. So work within the wisdoms
and having people around you who can speak to that,
totally.
if you can, as much as it depends on you to put yourself in a position where I've needed that. I've needed people
that's
to just
the privilege of being in a community, isn't it? And our communities, they've ebb and flow and they change, but the isolated kind of Western model thing, it's just it's destructive.
I remember Jay at one point, it was like Jay just said, bro, like, just relax, like, just calm down. You've been through something really hard. Just hang in there. Like, let go of this insatiable appetite for being important and contributing, and just take the next year and just do something quiet and helpful for someone. This is absolutely the best advice.
Awesome.
But I really needed that. I needed somebody who could see me and had the strength to speak that. Thanks, Jay. Yeah. Thanks, Sally. Should we leave it there?
Cool pie.
Yeah?
Yep.
Well, that was every bit as wonderful, and probably even more so than I'd hoped for. So thank you so much, Alistair.
I hope there's something you can use there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, we just, appreciate you and receive that. Just a mihi to and a greeting to everybody listening, and relationships are challenging. Get help.
As they say, it's difficult.
That's right.
It's complicated.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Much love, everyone.
Okay, fine.
We hope you found the conversation and stories on today's podcast helpful and insightful. If you want to go deeper, Restoring Connections offers online courses that cover key topics like personal responsibility, proactive care, powerful communication, and healthy boundaries. Go to www.restoringconnections.nz for more information. This podcast is funded by generous supporters from all over the world. Please consider supporting by going to the Restoring Connections website and hitting the Contribute button. By partnering with us, you're helping to provide mentoring, workshops, and training to others who are also restoring their connections.